Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever looked up at the stars, marveled at the moon landing, and thought about the brilliant minds that got us there? The story is more complex and far darker than you might imagine. What if I told you that the very same minds that designed weapons of terror during World War II were the architects of America's journey into space? Today, we re-pulling back the curtain on one of history's most controversial and secretive programs, Operation Paperclip. As World War II drew to a close, the Allied forces weren't just fighting for territory. They were in a frantic race for something else, scientific intelligence. Germany, for all its horrors, was a technological powerhouse. They had developed the world's first ballistic missiles, the V-2 rockets, which rained down on London with terrifying precision. United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union all knew that the scientists behind these weapons were the key to future military and technological supremacy. The Cold War was already casting its long shadow, and the race was on to grab these scientists before the other side could. This race was codenamed Operation Overcast, later renamed Operation Paperclip. The name came from the simple act of paperclipping the files of scientists, deemed valuable to the files of those who were to be questioned. It was a covert program run by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, or JIOA. Their mission was clear: identify, recruit, and quietly bring Germany's top scientific and engineering talent to the United States. The problem? Many of these brilliant minds were not just bystanders. They were active participants, and in some cases, committed members of the Nazi Party. They had used forced labor from concentration camps to build their rockets, and their work was directly tied to the atrocities of the regime. President Truman was initially very clear. He authorized the program, but with a strict condition. No one who had been a member of the Nazi Party or an active supporter of the regime was to be brought over. This presented a huge dilemma for the JIOA. The most brilliant scientists, the ones they desperately wanted, were almost all implicated. Men like Wernher von Braun, the genius behind the V-2 rocket, was not only a Nazi Party member, but also an officer in the SS. So what did the officials do? They bent the rules. They scrubbed the records, edited the biographies, and effectively laundered the histories of these individuals. The paperclip became a symbol of a whitewashed past, a sanitized file that erased inconvenient and horrifying truths to serve a new national interest. And so, they came. Over 1,600 German scientists and their families were secretly transported to the United States between 1945 and 1959. They were given new homes, new jobs, and new identities. They began working in secret at military installations like Fort Bliss, Texas, and White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico. Initially, they worked on adapting their V-2 rocket technology for the U.S. military. Their expertise was unparalleled, and they quickly became indispensable to America's burgeoning missile program. The public knew nothing about this. These men, who were just recently the enemy, were now quietly laying the groundwork for America's defense and its future ambitions. But their biggest stage was yet to come. In 1957, the world was shocked when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. The space race had begun, and America was losing. In response, the U.S. government created a new agency in 1958, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, and who was placed at the heart of this new organization? The German rocket team, led by none other than Wernher von Braun. Von Braun became the director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket. This was the colossal machine, the most powerful rocket ever built, that would ultimately carry the Apollo astronauts to the moon. Think about that for a moment. The iconic images of the moon landing? Neil Armstrong's one small step, the culmination of a national dream, it was all made possible by the Saturn V. And the Saturn V was the direct descendant of the V-2 rocket designed by the same man. Without Wernher von Braun and his team from Operation Paperclip, it is almost certain that the United States would not have reached the moon in 1969. They were not just contributors, they were the architects. Their influence extended across the board, from rocket propulsion to aerospace medicine and electronics. They truly were the builders of the space age. This legacy forces us to confront some deeply uncomfortable questions. Can we separate the science from the scientist? Can we celebrate the achievement of landing on the moon while acknowledging the dark moral compromises that made it possible? Operation Paperclip was a deal with the devil, pragmatic choice made in the chilling calculus of the Cold War. The US government decided that the strategic advantage of having these mines outweighed the moral cost of ignoring their pasts. It was a classic ends justify the means argument. The goal was to beat the Soviets and ensure American supremacy, and in that, the operation was a resounding success. But the success came at a price. It was a betrayal of the very principles America claimed to be fighting for in World War II. It was a profound injustice to the countless victims of the Nazi regime, whose suffering was directly linked to the work of some of these very men. The story of Operation Paperclip is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a messy, morally gray chapter of our history that reminds us that progress is often built on a foundation of difficult and sometimes deeply troubling compromises. It teaches us that the path to the stars is not always pure, and that even our greatest triumphs can have shadows lurking within them. The rockets that reached for the heavens were born from weapons that fell from the sky. So, the next time you look at that old photo of the lunar module on the moon, remember the full story. Remember the brilliance, the ambition, and the incredible achievement. But also remember the hidden history, the moral compromises, and the dark pact that helped make it all possible. It's a crucial and complicated part of our shared past. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive today. If you found this story as fascinating and thought-provoking as I do, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more hidden histories. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Till next time, stay curious.